Greetings, and welcome to my class on Andalusian Romanticism. This exciting artistic movement swept through southern Spain in the 19th century. It captured the hearts and minds of the region's most talented artists. In this class, you will find out who these famous artists were, and what qualities made Andalusian art so special. These artists celebrated the individualism of southern Spain by depicting both narrative and landscape art in a free-spirited approach. They captured the unique costumes and customs, traditions, landmarks, and landscapes, and so much more. You will discover that the heritage of southern Spain is one of the most unique cultures in the world. So, let's get started. After the end of the Napoleonic Wars, a large colony of foreigners, mainly British diplomats and their families, lived in Cadiz from 1815. Romantic travelers, with their taste for the exotic and unusual, also wrote stories and painted artworks about the most peculiar customs of the Andalusian land, forming a veritable ethnographic and literary corpus that will forever shape the romantic literary image of Andalusia. Both influenced the local production of easel paintings that corresponded to what was considered modern at the time. Writers such as Washington Irving, Richard Ford, Alexander Dumas, and artists such as David Roberts and John Frederick Lewis, to name but a few, contributed to the romantic myth about the costumes and landmarks of Andalusia. Romanticism was one of the great chapters in the history of Andalusian art. In an era that celebrated the entrepreneurial artist serving tourists with transportable easel paintings, the lexicon of iconographic images of southern Spain was catalogued in the most vivid costumes, especially those of dancers and bullfighters, but also in iconic monuments as well as stories of lovers, wild tavern parties and bandits hiding in the mountains, to name a few. Locals, however, preferred to buy paintings that were about Cadiz. This active port and its impregnable 18th-century defenses were not only a metropolis of the American colonies, but also a reference city for modernization. It was the place where a new society with new ideologies emerged, influencing the historical development of Spain in the 19th century. The role that the city and its important bourgeoisie played in this sense is undeniable, especially with regard to the emergence and spread of liberal ideologies. The first painter in this class I will talk about is Antonio Cabral Bejarano. He was a Spanish romantic and costumbrista, or folkloric painter. He was one of the founders of the Museum of Fine Arts in Seville. Antonio came from a family of painters. His father was Joaquín Cabral Bejarano, a well-known neoclassical painter. Antonio was born in 1798. As an adult, he renounced his maternal surnames and used only that of his father. That was probably a good idea for recognition. He received his artistic training from his father. In 1812, after the French invasion of the city, classes were resumed at the Escuela de Tres Nobles Arts and Antonio Cabral entered as a student. After graduating, he worked with his father on many public and religious works. In 1840, he was appointed director of the Museum of Fine Arts in Seville, the first person to hold this position in the museum's history. In 1846, he created a fleeting decoration for the facade of the civil government building on the occasion of the wedding of Isabel II and Luisa Fernanda. In 1850, he was appointed director of the School of Fine Arts in Seville. In July 1853, he was accused of selling 50 paintings from the Fine Arts Museum and was dismissed as director. He was later reinstated when he returned the 50 paintings to the museum. However, this artist is fundamental to the understanding of Seville's romantic painting in the first half of the 19th century. He painted costumbrista scenes with remarkable skill, which we will look at here today. On the banks of the river Guadalquivir we see a girl dancing and playing castanets. She is wearing the characteristic bolero dress, which can be recognized both by the cut of the skirt with its ruffles and by the low shoes used exclusively for this dance. The composition places the dancer in front of one of Seville's most iconic buildings, the old Arab watchtower from 1221, the Torre del Oro. Romantic travelers through Andalusia were attracted to the bolero dance because it is so difficult that the legs and arms must move the rhymes simultaneously with the body while operating the castanets. Only a few dancers included castanets in their repertoire, and it was almost forbidden for amateurs. The French, English, Italians and all other European nations enjoyed watching the bolero. Seville was one of the most famous centers for the bolero in the early years of the 19th century. Here Antonio Cabral Bejarano captures this highly complex and elegant dance, and the position of the dancer makes this painting so easy to identify. Here we see a colorful street vendor called a castañera, who has a small stove and grill for roasting chestnuts. She is sitting behind a low table with her back against the Giralda. The roasted chestnuts were often seasoned with aniseed and salt. Paintings and prints of chestnut vendors became popular in Spain between the last third of the 18th century and the mid-20th century, with a heyday in the 19th century. In this painting we see a lady of high society, recognizable by her fan, a common symbol in the iconography of aristocratic women. However, this woman is dressed like a maja, like the nationalist women of the past century. It is not surprising that the Romantic movement looked to their most representative street fashion to make it their high fashion. The maja was a bold nationalist woman whose identity rebelled against European influences, especially French ones. The majas, made famous by Goya's paintings, were distinguished by their Spanish mantilla scarves. In the 19th century, however, the mantilla acquired an important significance as a distinguished head covering for Spanish women. Queen Isabel II, a great lover of lace, promoted the use of the mantilla. Both she and her ladies wore them on numerous occasions. The maja dress we see here consisted essentially of a doublet and a basquina skirt. The doublet was a buttoned garment made of satin that covered the upper part of the body from the shoulders to the waist, tight-fitting but without whalebone. The basquina skirt was overlaid by another skirt that reached to the ankles and was accompanied by white stockings and shoes with low heels or ballerinas. The dress was complemented by a scarf over the shoulders, the hair tied into a bun and the use of a mantilla that revealed the face. From 1868, the wearing of the mantilla was abandoned in some places. In Seville and other Andalusian cities, however, it continued to enjoy great popularity. Here we see a typical bullfighter in costume. He wears the traje de luces, or suit of lights, the traditional attire worn by Spanish bullfighters in the bullring. The term derives from the sequins and reflective threads of gold or silver. These suits are based on the extravagant costumes worn by 18th century showmen involved in bullfighting, which were later used exclusively for the bullfighting ritual. Later embellishments include the montera hat, more elaborate embroidery and decorative accessories. Many of the most important painters of Spanish Romanticism immortalized the Andalusian bullfighter, Francisco Montes Reina, who was nicknamed Piquero. He was born in Chiclana, Cadiz, where he was baptized on January 13, 1805. Although the world of bullfighting was completely foreign to his family, Francisco showed a great fondness for wild cattle at a young age. Thus, in 1830, he triumphed in the bullrings of Seville and Jerez de la Frontera and attended a few courses at the newly founded bullfighting school in the capital Seville. His fame came on April 8, 1831 in Madrid for his courage when he faced dangerous fates such as fighting two bulls at the same time. His final downfall occurred at the bullfight in Madrid on July 21, 1849, where he suffered a significant goring to the leg from the bull, Rumban, from which he never recovered and fell ill with a malignant fever. He died on April 4, 1851, when he was only 46 years old. His death was a real shock to the bullfighting Spain of his time. Spanish Romanticism was not only about costumes, but also about narrative images, especially stories that glorified the values, history, and identity of Spanish heroes. Most Spanish national heroes came from Spain's glory days in the 15th century, when the country played a leading role in the world. One such hero was Christopher Columbus. Here we see a narrative of Columbus, who was in the prime of life at the time, traveling with his young son, Diego. They visited the monastery of La Arabida, where the monks feed them and gave them water. The prior, Juan Perez, a very learned man and former confessor to the Queen, received him very hospitably. The prior was so interested and convinced of the accuracy of Columbus' theories about the discovery of the New World that he provided him with the means for the journey and gave him an introduction to Queen Isabel. This narrative theme and setting were made famous in 1838, 20 years before this one, by the French Romantic painter Eugène Delacroix. The next most important Romantic painter of this decade was José Domínguez Bécquer. He was artistically trained at the School of Fine Arts in Seville, of which he was one of its most outstanding students. From his youth, he basically dedicated himself to small-format traditional paintings for the Sevillian and English markets, as well as the tourists who arrived to visit Andalusia through Cadiz. Bécquer is justifiably considered one of the initiators of Andalusian costumbrista painting of the folkloric type, within the Spanish Romantic artistic tradition. He also painted, although with less success, Sevillian urban scenes, as well as some portraits and many works of religious and historical themes. Sadly, Bécquer's career was prematurely cut short by his death, which occurred in Seville on January 26, 1841, at the early age of 36. Romantic painters in Seville were irresistibly taken with the slender and majestic silhouette of the Giralda, the city's landmark. This former minaret of an ancient Arab mosque was built in the late 12th century and transformed into a graceful 5-story bell tower in the 16th century. It was crowned by a huge bronze weathervane with the figure of Faith, represented as a robed woman with a palm tree in one hand and a shield in the other. Romantic artists liked to paint the Giralda from different angles, always surrounded by the exotic streets populated by the figures of passers-by. Bécquer captures the monument from a slightly lower vantage point, obscuring the rose window of the transept of the cathedral. Here we also see the little figures walking through the streets. This canvas is a fine testimony to Bécquer's skill, for he interprets the scene with a sober and restrained romanticism. However, he adds a great objectivity in the meticulous and almost archaeological description of all the decorative elements of the architecture. He uses a refined coloring with soft transparencies that envelop the buildings in a delicate and dense twilight atmosphere, where the painting's greatest charm lies. Here we see a suggestive portrait of the painter's wife, who turns her head from behind to the left and shows us her face. In her right hand she holds a handkerchief which she has wrapped around her back. She lets it fall carefully. Her somewhat forced pose and sketchy hand contrast with the meticulous and careful drawing of her face and back, where the glazes are neatly executed. Against a completely dark background, her facial features and her left shoulder stand out, areas where the artist has concentrated all the light. This figure breathes a certain air of seduction, and the simplicity with which Bécquer manages to capture it leads to a dialogue between the viewer and the lady, creating an atmosphere of intimacy that surrounds the painting with a romantic halo, in keeping with the taste of the times. Our next artist is again a Sevillian, named Andrés Cortés y Aguilar, who excelled in romantic landscape painting but also created Andalusian costumbrismo. He, too, was a vibrant member of this important saga. He came from a family of artists and was educated at the Royal School of the Three Noble Arts in Seville. Andrés began working in Seville in 1840, where he remained throughout his life and developed his career. He was a professor at the School of Fine Arts and a member of the Academy from 1862. The recognition he enjoyed in his city showered him with local honors and awards. He became a founding member of the Archaeological Council of Seville, a correspondent of the Royal Academy of Archaeology and Geography, and a member of Emulation and Development, in addition to being awarded several honorary medals. In the Sevillian art scene, he became famous for his attractive panoramic paintings of the city populated with figures, for which he is best known today. These enchanting works earned him considerable prestige in Seville's high society. These are the paintings we will analyze today. The Seville Fair, better known as the April Fair, dates back to an initiative of the industrialists José María Ibarra and Narciso Bonaplata, who proposed to the city council, on August 25, 1846, that a livestock fair be held for cattle, sheep and horses, but which also would include festivities for the public in the following year. The fair was considered an important event, and was celebrated with extravagant pomp and ceremony. Thus, from the beginning, the mercantile character of an agricultural and livestock market was combined with the hustle, bustle, fun and show of a folk festival, which was captured by the artists of the Romantic period. The fair extended over an open field outside the city walls, the Prado de San Sebastián. There, traders and exhibitors pitched their tents, and people from all walks of life flocked to the avenue to sample local products, and sing and dance, in an open-air festival, where the differences in social status of the visitors were nevertheless evident. What a sophisticated composition! André Cortés uses a somewhat rudimentary perspective, with which he compulsively and obviously wants to bring together the various groups of shepherds, traders, herds of cattle, wanderers, vendors, tents and stalls. From left to right are landmarks like the San Telmo Palace, the tobacco factory and the Puerta Nueva. We can also make out the garden groves and buildings of the Alcazar with its inner fence towers, as well as the silhouette of the cathedral with the Giralda, which completes the composition on the right. In the lower part of the painting, there are a number of groups of shepherds with their sheep around a cauldron, a pair of mayos walking, and a rider with a kite on a Moorish-style pony. In the left corner, the artist has placed a group of people in urban dress commenting on the scene, while another, sitting on a field tripod, takes notes. A detail that makes us wonder if this was a landowner or farmer who wanted to quantitatively note the heads of cattle and therefore commissioned the painting. We will never know for sure, but it is fun to speculate. This work by Andrés Cortés, from 1863, is a response to the aesthetic landscapes of the Romantics, whose imaginary vision conveys the idea that man is an integral part of nature, without venturing too far into a fantasy world. The painter composes his canvas in an orderly and structured composition, in 3 horizontal planes, with elements corresponding to earth, water and sky. In this painting, we see a sunny valley, crossed by a river with crystal clear water, its banks lined with rocks. A couple, a washerwoman and a fisherman, are saying goodbye to each other. He, sitting peacefully on the bank, holds a fishing rod in his right hand, while she carries a basket of laundry on her head like a classic Maenad. She is accompanied by a dog. Both are wearing timeless clothing. Above them are several cylindrical towers, reminiscent of the Roman tomb of the Plautii, but altered and relocated by the painter's imagination, and a church half hidden by foliage with a polygonal spire. This is followed on a lower level by a series of buildings, of varying structure, framed in the background by high, snow-covered mountains. The cloudscape, which occupies slightly less than the horizontal half of the painting, favors a brilliant light filtered through the fluffy and stormy clouds on the left. The end result is a very attractive panorama, built with clarity, lucidity, and calm. Sevillian painters, who produced small paintings for foreign English travelers, and wealthy citizens, often made matching or complementary pairs. In this way, Cortés creates this fantastic landscape to complement the previous one. Here, two small couples are nestled in a beautiful panorama. They are attractive for their idyllic beauty, with a peasant character that is stereotypical of a romantic image that is more ideal than real. It consists of three horizontal planes, corresponding respectively to the earth, the water, and the cloudscape. On the shore, two washerwomen carry their laundry baskets, while their fishermen husbands help them with their work. They wear loose dresses, and the men wear a jacket and trousers gathered at the calf. They wear leggings and a hat. The figures are flanked by a sturdy tree and a beached boat with oars and an anchor. The water surface could correspond to a wide river, or rather, a strip of sea, crossed in the middle by barges with white sails and small rowing boats. In the background, at the foot of a mountain, you see a beautiful coastal town with the tall towers of a cathedral rising on a steep wooded hill. To the left of the viewer is a sleepy little town with a city wall and two cylindrical towers crowned by pointed spires. The charming scene is illuminated by a wide sky with bright colors and fluffy clouds. Here, life in nature is enjoyed as an inherited gift where life comes to full fruition. The couples in this idyllic setting share their daily chores. This cheerful, optimistic, and loving composition is staged to evoke a sense of peace. Our next painter is Manuel Barón y Carrillo. He is considered the greatest master of the Andalusian romantic landscape. Manuel Barón began his first artistic training as a pupil of Antonio Cabral Bejarano, and studied from 1828 to 1835 at the School of Fine Arts in Seville, an institution where he became assistant in 1841 and director of the painting department in 1844. Manuel Barón also studied with the British, Romantic, landscape painter David Roberts. He regularly participated in public exhibitions. In 1872, he was appointed director of the School of Fine Arts in Seville, a position he held until his death on January 15, 1884. Here we see an easel painting from 1847, showing a panoramic view of the city of Malaga. The view is oriented to the southwest. The sky is gloomy and creates inland winds that cause the waves to crash against the rocks in the foreground. It is late afternoon. Dim and lit areas alternate, creating a theatrical effect, a device often used in Barón's work. The light refracts over Mount Hibofaro and the Arab walls of the Alcazaba. Highlighted are the sails of the ships in the harbor. In the distance we see the profile of the San Nicolas lighthouse and the smoke rising from the tower of a steamer. In this painting, we are reminded of the importance of the development of a new, 19th-century society in Spain. The Spanish cities on the periphery gained in new strength. In the Andalusian surroundings, Malaga and especially Cadiz, with their active seaports, were the cities that had a special, social importance, and an outstanding economic, political, and cultural development. For these reasons, this type of landscape, with its port, monuments, and surroundings, is a new cultural product, commissioned by the local bourgeoisie. In this painting, we see a vast and serene cloudscape. The orientation is that of the north, with a view of the valley of the Guadalquivir River, whose channel is barely discernible. Here we see the profile of the towers and walls of the city as they appear on the horizon. On the left side of the composition is a farmhouse. This farmhouse could be a popular tavern or a campsite for gypsies, which could explain the soldier talking to a woman at the bottom left of the screen. This composition is somewhat rigid, and the focus is on a sick or dying palm tree. which is disconcerting. The scene is undoubtedly the result of combining elements that are both from memory and staged. In the foreground, a lively group of young people in traditional costumes are dancing to the music created by a guitarist. The idea that only in southern Spain can an impromptu party break out at any time was part of its mythological charm. In the 19th century, Cadiz had become the city of new ideas in terms of modernization, culture, and politics. It was the place where the important bourgeoisie met to plan Spain's new future and spread their liberal ideologies. In this 1854 view of Cadiz, taken from a space outside the walls of Punta de Baca, we see a vast seaplane that plays an essential role in the composition. It shows a perspective profile of the town, with figures in the foreground wearing colorful costumes. Near the viewer are popular fisherman types, which is common in this type of view, as it always aims to include some character models, who identify with the country. In fact, they become significant landscape elements, in keeping with the Romantic tradition of appreciation and interest in folk types that characterize cultures and territories. In this way, this type of landscape, in this case the city, remains linked to its cultural character as a place and its society. Most likely, this canvas was commissioned by a large landowner, a merchant, or a high-ranking official. Interestingly, Bérain's composition is literally based on the French lithographer Nicolas Chappy's view of Cadiz, published in Paris in 1830. One of the most romantic landscapes, by the Sevillian painter Manuel Bérain, is this 1854 painting, showing the city of Seville, seen from the south, with the Guadalquivir riverbed in the foreground. We see the Paseo de las Delicias or Walk of the Delights, an urban and recreational place in Seville that sadly no longer exists. Travelers arriving by boat from Cadiz got their first glimpse of the city. It was an unexpected and awe-inspiring sight that many visitors would remember and cherish. The painting follows the concept of a topographical, urban, descriptive, and monumental landscape, in a scenographic and theatrical way. The Los Remedios Monastery, the Torre del Oro, the Palace of San Telmo, and the cathedral with the Giralda, appear in profile on the horizon. In Bérain's oeuvre, paintings like this probably correspond to a series on the Guadalquivir, versions dedicated to various scenic locations along the river. The canvas consists of notes and details recorded on location and later executed in the studio. Compositional details, such as the rowing and sailing boats, and the native figures on the shores of the foreground, are important romantic elements that have been captured. Other details, such as the port and the presence of a steamboat next to the Torre del Oro, symbolize the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the city. This is contrasted by the Sunday stroll of the local bourgeoisie, in period costume near the Salon de Cristina, which gives a certain chronicle to the composition. In the picture below we have another view of the Guadalquivir, the real lifeline of the city, because it is navigable. Its banks are still a meeting place for civilians today. This pleasant landscape is a very characteristic example of Bérain's academic training, and shows the guidelines of the classicist landscape. He was a recognized master of this genre in the Seville of his time, and had already fully developed his own style. The view shows an extensive landscape, certainly on the outskirts of the city, with the wide and gentle waters of the river flowing through it. The composition shows both order and clarity in the arrangement of the grove and foreground as a whole. Some parts are flat to suggest spatial depth, almost like a theater set. Near the bank, in the middle of a meadow, is a picnic area with a shed. This seems to be a popular spot for festivals, with numerous groups having a snack and dancing in the quiet of the afternoon. In the foreground, a few walkers wait on the jetty for one of the barges to cross to the other bank, while other boats, full of people, sail on the shimmering river. I admire this wide panoramic view, which brings the sky into the foreground and then loses itself in the extremely delicate distance. Baron takes special pains to describe the little figures, who look beautiful with their authentic, colorful clothing. The building they inhabit is depicted with a unique subtlety. The shades of color extend to the horizon line, while the water has a metallic sheen that is both decorative and atmospheric. The figures in the corner of the canvas are full of charm, and show narrative detail, in their folkloric costumes. Baron has succeeded in creating a delightful painting, and it is no wonder that it was very popular in his collection. Bravo! Baron had a particular decorative instinct in his treatment of the picturesque landscape, which was popular with the clientele of his day. He spiced up the narrative with figures, like travelers and bandits. His palette, however, was always bright, but not garish colors. Baron's works had much appeal and great success. In the top painting, the foreground of the composition is taken up by a couple on horseback, chatting amicably. They are on a journey. On foot, a few meters behind, they are followed by another figure, covered with a thick blanket, who must be their escort, for he holds a blunderbuss in his hand, ready for a possible attack by bandits, which were very common on journeys at that time. The same climate of serenity and calm continues in the rest of the composition. A pinkish, dusky light floods the landscape, giving it a slightly melancholic character, and reflecting the influence that the work of Richard Ford had on Manuel Baron. The lack of drama is evident in the broad horizon of the plains, interspersed with small patches of woodland and hills, and in the calm, winding river that appears on the right side of the painting. The composition ends in the center with a large rock, with rounded shapes, that gives a view of the profile of the mountain range, in the distance. In the bottom painting, we see a gang of bandits spread out on the stony rocks, beneath an imposing cave entrance. They are trying to defend themselves with their blunderbusses. They are attacked by the Benemerita, in English, the worthy, from whom the Guardia Civil would later emerge in 1929. One of them lies wounded, on the ground, while a tearful boy seeks refuge in his mother's skirts over the noise of the gunshots. It looks as if she is pleading, loudly, for a ceasefire. With a theatrical approach, Baron has arranged the canvas surfaces strictly horizontally, with the edge, effectively marking the areas of light and shadow, until he has led the eye into the clarity of the distance. In the 19th century, the Cueva del Gato, very close to Benayahan in the province of Malaga, was one of the most famous places in the highlands of Ronda, as a hideout for bandits and smugglers. Located about 10 kilometers from the town of Ronda, it is a huge, limestone cave near the Guadalquivir River. As it was used as a burial site in the Paleolithic period, this cave is an important archaeological site. Today, it is a natural area of great beauty, and of interest to all who study caves and cave systems. Among the many landscapes of the city of Ronda in Malaga, and its surroundings that Baron painted during his life, the picturesque site of the famous Cueva del Gato was undoubtedly the artist's favorite. He painted several versions with small variations of the same landscape. The European and Spanish landscape painters of the Romantic period had a very special attraction to natural caves, because of their overwhelming, and somewhat mysterious natural component, which so often captured the painter's imagination. Joaquín Domínguez Becker was one of the most representative painters of the first generation of Sevillian Romanticism, and the luckiest in the family of artists of that surname, since he lived the longest at 62, and was the only one to celebrate triumphs in life. Because of his personality and appearance, he was called the Don Quixote of painters. He enjoyed the highest reputation and influence in the Sevillian society of his time. Among other things, he was a teacher, academic, tutor, and curator of the royal palace. But, before he was ordained as an artist, he had to assert himself in the competitive, local environment as a costume painter, together with his cousin, José Becker. Both cousins laid the foundation for the popular costumbrismo, with a distinct, Sevillan accent, plus echoes of Bartolomé Esteban Murillo's emotional exuberance and soft colors. When his cousin died, he devoted himself to his career with vigor and monopoly. His paintings were soon sold at high prices. In fair trade, he would later teach his orphan nephew, Valeriano. In 1838, Joaquin, then 21 years old, created the work on the left. An attractive iconography that presents two picturesque Andalusian prototypes, the bullfighter and the maja. They meet in a tavern, alternately illuminated by light and shadow. He, smoking a cigar, and confidently displaying a gallant attitude, while she, with a suggestive smile, makes a gesture of removing her shawl to give it to the bullfighter, perhaps for good luck. The ensemble is completed by two other figures in the background. On the right sits a picador, or horseman, who pokes the bull back with his staff during the fight. In his left hand, he holds his hat. The woman he talks with is either another maja, or perhaps the tavern maid. A painting of the Virgin Mary hangs on the wall, underlining the atmosphere of the room. The descriptive value of the work is balanced by the richness and colors of the typical dress, so that strictly speaking, it can be considered a painting of costumes, rather than customs. The bullfighter's suit, with its iconic montera hat, stylish pink cloak, white silk stockings, and black slippers, shines in full splendor. The maja's white dress and black velvet shawl harmonize perfectly with her patent leather ballerina shoes. They are all just so adorable and trendy. I just love them. The cityscape on the right shows a view of the Casa Lona, designed by Juan de Herrera in 1572 for civilian purposes. This building was a symbol of Seville as one of the most important cities in the West, as the Catholic monarchs established a monopoly in the port for the legal movement of people and goods, with countries discovered overseas. This led to a very large cosmopolitan population settling in the city, coming from all corners of the continent to do business with America. The painting opens up to a wide panoramic view of the surroundings, with an atmospheric depth of field, achieved through the gradation of light tones, and a loose and sketchy brushstroke. The canvas is populated by a variety of people in period costumes. The men wear their top hats, which were a symbol of social status and power in the 19th century. The ladies wear their mantillas and shawls. This work is a great example of the connection between the early Renaissance and the modern Romanticism of the 19th century. In the painting on the left we see two young women in a narrow alley. They are wrapped in their beautiful black scarves. Behind them is their chaperone, for it was not decent for young ladies to walk alone. They were walking in pairs, because it was also not decent for young women to walk alone in the street. They pass a confectionery shop with a half-eroded sign hanging above the door. A pair of young majos are facing them, and one of them makes a hand sign that means they should all meet for a date. "There are two of us," he points his finger in the air, "and two of you," is his conclusion. Becker presents a refined architectural perspective of a street in a city, certainly Seville, which seems a little forced and stifled by the proportions of the figures, who barely have room to function in the narrow space of the street. Here Becker's early preference for a sober color palette, with lots of ochre, and especially black, which will characterize much of his work, is evident. In contrast to the eloquent scenery, we witness a very interesting technique with which the artist gives an aged appearance to the facades of the houses, which are shaded with colored transparencies. As an accompanying canvas, Becker created the narrative painting on the right. It was popular to sell these small scenes in pairs, but in principle they did not necessarily have to be a connected plot. In this case, however, one might suspect a possible sequence between the two stories. Perhaps the boys in the other painting did make a date with the two girls. In that case, this could be the place where they had their rendezvous. Here we see the young people in a tavern, together with other guests. One of the couples stands up, castanets in hand, and slowly begins the first steps of the dance. The others have grouped around them, although most are distracted by conversation. In this painting, Becker creates an indoor environment with bare walls and a high ceiling that allows for a vertical canvas. The painter demonstrates his skill in handling the light source, as it comes in through the side window, by marking abrupt backlights that break the gloom of the interior and clearly highlight the figures of the young dancers and the seated women. The reduced light is used to great effect for the men in the background, especially the one perched on a chair or other tall object, to see the dancers. Faded out and without extreme detail, a loving, seated mother can be seen paying attention to her adoring child. In this entertaining festival scene of the Seville Fair, Joaquin Dominguez Becker shows his mastery in his picturesque observation of the different types of people who come to the fair. He describes them with colorful and anecdotal details with great narrative impact that manage to capture the viewer's attention. This attractive painting by Becker is a fine testimony to his talent. We see the gate of San Fernando, and a part of the city wall behind which the grove of gardens of the royal palace peeps out. In the background, we see the hamlet of the city, and the cathedral with the Giralda that is rising up into the sky, imposing and powerful. At the foot of the wall, the showmen have set up a round tent and a marquee. In between, various gentlemen and ladies of high society ride on horses or in carriages to avoid mingling with the crowd. On the far left, some peasants are preparing to eat from a communal pot in the shade of a tree. Next to them, an Arabian horse is being offered for sale. On the right, we see the row of stalls in front of which one is frying and selling donuts, and others are trying to sell a poor, old, battered donkey to an unsuspecting buyer. This canvas is the pair to the previous painting. Here we see an open landscape, somewhere on the outskirts of the city. Several people are celebrating with a picnic, next to a terminus cross marking a road junction. On the floor we see a tablecloth with leftovers. At the foot of the stone cross, a group of Andalusians are cheering with their palms to a young woman who is dancing, swinging, and flicking her castanets. Everywhere in Andalusia, especially around Seville, it was popularly believed that impromptu parties could, and did, break out at any time, anywhere. The sun is just setting. In the shade of the base of the cross, a couple sits with their small newborn baby, while a few distracted children lie in the grass and play. They are all watched by a shepherd leaning on his staff at the foot of some pine trees, on the far right. We see a low horizon, dominated by a vigorous cloudscape. The land is imbued with a pastoral tranquility, and spiced with small scenes. Becker shows great elegance in the composition of this landscape. A pronounced horizontal format is peppered with various elements that direct the viewer's gaze from the foreground to the distance. Starting from the main group, and the tavern next to the road, we see two hikers walking towards the huts further back along the road. In the background, behind the grove, a monastery can be seen. The various components of the landscape are treated with an exquisite and attentive execution that does not disappoint. The natural elements of the landscape, especially the broad depiction of the cloudy sky, show the undeniable skill of the painter. If the previous painting testifies to Becker's particular predilection for urban scenes, then this painting shows the artist's great skill in panoramic images of vast landscapes. Our next painter is Manuel Cabral Aguado Bejarano, son of Antonio Cabral Bejarano, with whom he was trained. He attended the School of Fine Arts in Seville, where he later worked as a professor, and was also an honorary member of the Seville Academy of Fine Arts. He received honorable mentions at the National Fine Arts Exhibitions of 1858, 1864, 1879 and 1880 in Cadiz and 1856, 1858, 1867 and 1878 in Seville. Manuel also participated in the creation of paintings for romantic travelers taking a trip through Spain. His paintings aimed to recreate or relive the most traditional Andalusian scenes. The narratives of events in daily life or of festivals were filled with popular types of Andalusian folklore fashion. His works had great success in the Andalusian capitals as well as in Madrid. When he died, his works were already considered old-fashioned. This signed and dated painting by Manuel Cabral Bejarano from 1850 shows us the interior of a tavern where a completely drunken villager bursts into the limelight. He tries to sing a song and perform a dance as best he can since he is obviously drunk. The group laughs as the man throws off his jacket and then opens his shirt to reveal his manly hairy chest. A devotional amulet dangles from a chain around his neck. While most in the crowd look at the ridiculous man with a benevolent smile, the man at the very front laughs heartily. A waiter behind him cannot stand it any longer, and holds onto the wall to hold back his tears of laughter. At the age of only 23, Manuel proves to be a competent artist with a special talent for scenographic depictions. The architecture of the modest tavern is very carefully designed. The spatial and perspective dynamics are very effectively staged by the sequence of arches, the steep staircase, the beams, and the bridge corridor above, over which the tavern keeper hangs to watch the ridiculous spectacle. The painting is also particularly successful in arranging the figures without anyone getting in the way. Each of them is given an expressive reaction that suits such a comic plot, which is also testament to this painter's unique narrative instincts. Despite the almost caricaturist features of most of the types, which fit the burlesque tone of the plot, Manuel Cabral Bejarano always shows a special elegance in the drawing of the characters. This is evident in the two women, one of whom sits on a chair with her guitar, and the other sits on the right and turns her head. Both hold elegant and restrained poses. The ruffles on the skirt and the fringes on the mantillas are painted with clear and bright colors, which was the key to his success in those years. In this companion painting, the group is involved in a fight at the tavern. The brawl, involving numerous people, breaks out in the middle of a spacious but modest room. In the center of the painting, a man is trying to protect himself with his right arm, which he has wrapped with his coat for protection. In his right hand he holds a knife, and is ready to attack. Around him are many other violent scenes. Behind him, a man swings a chair with great force, another man holds his cane over his shoulder in an attack position, while another holds a bench over his head. In the foreground, a man swings a guitar, ready to smash it on the head of the man who is already lying on the ground, looking up with frightened eyes. The woman next to them holds back a third man who apparently also wants to join in. To the right, on the floor, lies a knife victim holding his wound. The bloody knife can be seen next to him. A distraught woman stands over him, crying. A gentleman in a top hat wants nothing to do with the brawl, and flees up the stairs. In the upper part of the picture, a woman tries to stop a man with a shotgun who probably wants to put an end to the chaos below. Francisco Goya also liked a good brawl scene, if you know his painting entitled The Brawl at the New Inn. It shows not only a brawling group of drunks, but also the tavern keeper who wants to put an end to the goings-on by opening fire with his gun. In a time before television and the internet, I can imagine that this kind of romantic painting made for hours of entertaining conversation in the drawing room or parlor where it hung. In the 19th century, the newly built houses of Seville demanded that their halls be decorated with the typical folklore and customs of the region. In turn, foreign travelers passing through the city bought folk paintings as souvenirs to have a friendly, beautiful and decorative reminder of their stay. Here we see Manuel Cabral Bejarano, like his father, paints an iconic Sevillan majo who appears with gallant presence. He is a handsome and elegant young man who likes to smoke. His head is covered with the calañas, the traditional hat from Andalusia. He wears a beautiful white shirt with lace ruffles on the front. His black waistcoat has gold embroidery and his thick black cloak with velvet lining covers most of his body. His knee-high boots are very glamorous and fringed, but they have riding spurs. To his left rises a small, wooded hillside. To his right is the river Guadalquivir, and in the background the profile of the city is indicated, from which the Torre del Oro stands out. In Europe during the Romantic period, the gender role of women changed greatly. Previously known only for their domestic work, after the Industrial Revolution they were valued for their ability to work outside the home. However, women still had no political rights, were limited to a few menial jobs, and were legally non-persons who lost their property to their husbands upon marriage, and were unable to sue in court. However, in Spain, the transgressive image of the ma has emerged at a moment that changed human relations between men and women. Therefore, the image of the maha was like a symbol of social protest, a break with female stereotypes that had shaped women's lives since the Middle Ages. The Sevillan maha is the counterpart to the male image. She, too, is positioned to capture her physical posture and behavior. She is elegantly dressed in a bolero skirt that has all the grace and beauty that is both folkloric and fashionable. The woman covers her upper body with a wide shawl from which the fringes of her mantilla peeks out at the waist. The lower part of her anatomy is covered with a pink ruffled skirt, horizontally furrowed by 3 blue edges. She wears white stockings, and her feet are covered with elegant black slippers attached to her legs with leather straps. In her hand she carries a fan, while her hair is adorned with roses at her temples. As can be seen, her appearance seems to match the attention paid to her by the maho in the accompanying painting. The landscape background complements that of the previous painting, placing the maha on the riverbank in front of a small arched bridge over which flows the Tagarete stream, which passes just before it flows into the Guadalquivir. In the background, the walls of the city can be seen, from which the silhouette of the cathedral with the Giralda Tower stands out. Behind the maha, on the right, is a group of trees. These are painted with the same vitality as the trees to the left of the maho. These 2 vernacular figures embody the purest essence of the romance of Seville. The painting on the left of this slide shows a gypsy woman in the center offering some of her tasty delicacies, called buñuelos, to a handsome horseman. Legend has it that no one made better donuts than a famous woman from El Salvador. Perhaps this painting is a tribute to her. The origin of these deep-fried treats goes back about 2,000 years, to countries like Turkey, Morocco or Egypt, where people ate balls of deep-fried dough with honey. No one knows exactly when these great snacks migrated to Spain. The donut vendor offers her plate to the rider, who is dressed in his smart, tighter-fitting short suit. His trousers are high-waisted, and his jacket is short. The outfit is completed by his hat, called the calañas. He also has an exquisite sash. The exchange takes place in the field on the outskirts of the city where the Seville Fair is held, one of the city's most important commercial and social events. The rider's horse is also richly decorated with fringes and tassels. In front of the horse walks a blonde girl with her dog. She is holding 2 donuts on a string. On the left side of the picture a woman is sitting with a portable stove on which she is frying more donuts. 2 men seem to be helping her. On the other side of the picture is another horseman with a woman riding side saddle on the back of the horse. The woman is staring at another man who is standing on the ground and returning her gaze. The composition of this painting is balanced, but I find that the girl in the foreground has a strange proportion. The atmospheric weather of the day is also at odds with the flags on the tents, which flutter away, while elsewhere in the narrative there seems to be no wind. The painting on the right of this slide is the counterpart, although the subjects, apart from the festive content, are not similar. At the entrance to a farmhouse or estate, Manuel Cabral Bejarano uses architecture to frame his figures. A graded landscape, reminiscent of a primitive Flemish Baroque painting, stretches in shades of blue to the horizon. The figures are refined and complete, and stand out for their brilliant colors and details. He has used his most skillful drawing technique, which is underlined by the remarkable lighting, cold and from above, that they receive. A girl in a pink skirt and green shawl claps as she prepares for a dance. Another colorful woman in yellow and green plays her guitar. The other figures watch the dancer or clap along to set the rhythm of the dance. A rider in festive costume stands behind the guitarist and lights a cigar. Behind this group we see the walls of a farmhouse and to the left a pair of horses, one of them in festive costume. In the distance we see an Andalusian rider with his 3-meter-long wooden pole, used to herd cattle. Further, in the distance, a small village appears and then another town, larger and perhaps of greater importance. Once again we are reminded of the stories, whether true or invented, that Andalusians break out in song and dance, anywhere at any time. This painting offers another vision of the Seville Fair, an event that took place every year in the field outside the city walls in the Prado de San Sebastián. The symbol of the new powerful citizens of this era were the horsemen who represented the agrarian bourgeoisie. These new lords of the horse and farm occupy a central and prominent place in this composition. Here we see a macho horseman pointing to a beautiful woman. She holds a rose in her hand. The story is left to our imagination, of course, but I am sure he has either given her the flower in return for a date or that he is making fun of the rose. In any case, his friend behind him has already succeeded and has a lady sitting on the back of his horse. These characters are beautifully portrayed. It was believed that women with a high, rounded, clean forehead, a fine aquiline nose, red lips and a small, abruptly curved, oval chin were the most beautiful. Of course, this gender stereotype was created by foreign travelers trying to identify with the regional population. In contrast, on the right we see the other popular fairground figure, the donut seller. These women were usually attributed to the gypsies from Granada. She is dressed in plain colors and wears flowers in her hair. She is joined by the stereotypical male type from Granada who wears a short jacket and a conical hat. Other popular rogue figures on the left barter and trade with sheep and pigs kept in a pen. This represents the original intention of the fair as an animal market. Here Manuel also lets us get a better look at the tents or stalls where private parties were held. Tavern owners had these types of tents to bring their business to the market. The romantic architectural setting of Seville is skillfully emphasized by most of the emblematic monuments. We see the cathedral with the Giralda, the royal palace, the royal tobacco factory and the gate of San Fernando, which has not yet been demolished as the city still had its walls and gates. This is the last time Manuel Cabral paints the great festival of Seville. Narrative scenes of romantic courtship, in which we see the process of amorous conquest, were also a very popular type of painting. In the first painting, the scene is set on a boulevard, certainly a recreation of one of the painter's favorite places for social gatherings. We see two Mahas walking arm in arm. They are magnificently dressed and adorned with flowers in their hair. They have stopped at the edge of the main path where a young Maho is introducing himself. It was customary for women to walk in pairs for safety reasons, but it was also considered respectful. A busy promenade was within the moral boundaries and social etiquette of the time. Manuel Bejarano gives us an insight into the love practices of the romantic Andalusians. Here we see that the girl who is interested in the young man looks him in the eye, while her friend directs her gaze to the little Maltese dog at her feet. In the background, trees can be seen disappearing into the distance as the path curves gently. A romantic couple has stopped to perhaps share a brief kiss. Again, the narration stimulates the imagination to think up a variety of stories. Further back, a group of 4 people are talking. Manuel's talent for painting fabrics is remarkable. The mixture of rough and smooth textures of the young man's cloak is as impressive as the folds in the garment. The sheer fabric and delicate color of the skirt of the girl in the middle are as impressive as her smooth, voluptuous skin. For travelers and romantics alike, this painting answers the question of how the locals spend their leisure time. The scene opposite is set in the privacy of an Andalusian bodega or grocery shop, as evidenced by the barrel with a dipping stick. It can be seen in the dim light in the foreground. The focus is on a young Maha sitting comfortably at a table with a plate of beans, wine and bread in front of her. The man opposite appears to be an older gentleman, clean-shaven and dressed in expensive clothes. A gold chain is emblazoned at his waist and on the wrist of his cloak is a row of shiny gems, suggesting expensive jewelry. In front of him is a plate of bocarones, small pickled fish. He claps with joy when he sees that young Maho is going to serenade the couple. The way the man tilts on his chair is a trick by the painter to add a little tension to the narrative. Another man with a bottle of wine in his hand passes the guitar with the other. I imagine him to be the shopkeeper. The treatment of the still life objects, such as the fork, the knife, the glasses, and the bottles, is done with a touch of realism. Again, the narrative is left to our imagination. There appear to be small shot glasses on the table, making me wonder if the bottles contain anise, an anise-flavored liqueur drunk as a digestif in most Mediterranean countries. In this painting we see the beginning of the end. The once romantic influences, triggered by painting with the imagination, are now beginning to bow to the pressure of the return of realism. In an era fascinated by scientific inventions such as street lamps and light in general, a new movement called Impressionism emerges. Now that most of the famous masters of the Andalusian Romantic genre are dead, Manuel finds that his style begins to merge with the new movements. However, he remains true to his passion for everyday scenes and costumes, which leads him to mix his genres. In this painting, a woman poses jauntily and looks directly at us, the viewers. She holds a red fan in her hand. This symbol fascinated both Andalusian painters and travelers alike in the 19th century. Fans, especially red ones, were exotic objects found in the studios of many foreign artists, and in homes abroad. Manuel creates a bare courtyard with a few withered potted plants, and a bougainvillea without leaves indicating winter. Nothing in the background disturbs this woman dressed in a body-hugging embroidered shawl, a black mantilla, and a skirt reminiscent of late 19th century fashion. In contrast to the carefree romantic style of his earlier works, this painting is executed with the academic precision appropriate to a return to realism. He also adds a touch of impressionism by hinting at his knowledge of light through soft shadows and the scraping of oil paint, with the stump of his brush, to suggest a few tufts of grass in the courtyard. Manuel models the woman's face with great care. Gone are the charming, stereotypical, romantic full faces. This woman's face is unique, portrait-like. In the next picture we see a woman on her knees in front of a bucket of soapy water. It is difficult to tell whether this is a washerwoman, a popular motif in Romanticism, or simply a mother cleaning her family's clothes. She captures our gaze as she submerges her laundry and scrubs it on the scouring board. Her hands are hard, worn and veiny. Behind the hard-working woman is a little boy, poor and ragged, but healthy-looking. He amusingly blows soap bubbles with a straw. In his left hand he holds the soap in an earthenware pot. Here we see how Manuel has embraced the return of realism and how well he has mastered it. Yes, the woman's hands are striking, but so are her decorative elements, such as the tortoise-shell comb and flower in her hair and her delicate earrings. The earthenware pots scattered on the canvas are also executed in a Baroque realism technique. His mastery is also evident in the folds of her scarf, skirt and the twisted clothing on the edge of the tub. Traditionally, the image of the child blowing soap bubbles was used as a symbol of the transience of life. On this canvas it is seen together with the laborious work of the washerwoman and represents, perhaps unconsciously, a painted metaphor of modern life. I find the washerwoman's eyes a little forced and awkward. And the boy looks like an old man with a receding hairline and very large ears. I do not know what to make of these elements. In any case, Manuel does not let us down when it comes to giving us an insight into the past life of ordinary people. Here we have a narrative painting that leaves much to the imagination, even though it has since slipped into a realistic format. A young girl, dressed in the latest Parisian fashion, dances on an old table that has been converted into her stage. She is a beauty with delicate flowers in her hair to match her fringed scarf. She looks out at us, or perhaps at the people in the foreground whom we cannot see. It is a simple yet complex and mysterious composition. She is the only subject, but the other elements of the narrative force us to believe that she is not alone. There is the broken plate and an overturned wine bottle on the floor in front of her. There is also a hat on the floor, which was worn by both men and women at the time. Did she knock these things off the table so she could dance? On an abandoned chair lies a black shawl with fringes and flowers. To whom does this shawl belong? Another chair is at the side of the table. she probably used this chair to get onto the table in the first place. The background of the courtyard is surrounded by green plants, which the artist depicts both realistically and with dabs of impressionism. The last painting in this lesson on Manuel Cabral Bejarano was created towards the end of his life, just a few years before his death in 1891. Unfortunately, the cartoonish charm and poetry of the Andalusian romantic genre, that dominated the reign of Queen Isabel II, had faded, as artists throughout Spain began to revive realism to depict episodes from daily life. Here we find stylized figures, a beautiful young woman gazing with pleasure at her daughter. In the center of this composition we see a woman in a pretty, hourglass-shaped, pale pink dress with lace ruffles. She has a black mantilla knotted around her shoulders. She is holding an open parasol to keep out the sun. The woman gracefully steps down a staircase that is horizontal in the composition. Her daughter is wearing a delightful low-waisted dress with a striking dusty pink sash tied at her buttock. She also wears a pretty wide-brimmed hat with a few tiny flowers in the same shade of pink. On her feet she wears high-heeled boots with buttons on the sides. The girl shows her wooden hoop to her mother. In this popular children's game, in which a large hoop is rolled across the floor with the help of a stick, the player has to find out how long the hoop can be kept upright. A little dog stares at the characters from the top step, completing a wonderful diagonal arrangement of figures. The park landscape could have been inspired by the Cristina Gardens in Seville. The upper part of the painting is very interesting, with a palm tree rising above a background of lush vegetation and statues on high pedestals, giving the scene considerable elegance and distinction. As with many Impressionist paintings of the late 19th century, the imitation of the latest upper-class Parisian fashion suggests that he had a new kind of clientele, namely the Sevillan upper class. In summary, Manuel Cabral Bejarano was one of the leading exponents of the bright and colorful artistic genre known as Andalusian Romanticism. Although he had grown up in the shadow of his father Don Antonio, who was considered the patriarch of this picturesque style, Manuel had succeeded in interpreting the romantic essence of life in southern Spain. But in 1882, when he signed this painting in a Sevillan park, the cheerful, friendly and romantic genre had disappeared forever. Our next painter is Rafael Díaz de Benjumea. He was a Spanish painter of history, portraits, and paintings on Sevillan folk themes. Rafael began his training in 1845 at the Royal Academy of Noble Arts of Santa Isabel in Seville, where he was an outstanding student. From 1848 he worked for Antonio de Orleans, who was the brother-in-law of Queen Isabel II, and lived in the Palace of San Telmo in Seville. Rafael participated in the National Fine Arts exhibitions until 1887. In 1850, he moved to Madrid and took part in the exhibition of the Academy of San Fernando, where he was later requested to be the second painter of the House of Queen Isabel II. Two of the compositions he produced during this period led to him filing a lawsuit against the dethroned queen in 1873 for non-payment for the works. Despite this, he was awarded the title of Knight of the Royal and Distinguished of Carlos III and Holy Sepulchre and appointed commander of the American Order of Isabel the Catholic. He participated in the National Fine Arts exhibitions until 1887. What we will analyze and enjoy in this lesson are his romantic paintings with Andalusian costumes. Rafael Benjumea belongs to the group of Sevillan painters who were active during the heyday of Andalusian Romanticism. He began to paint Sevillan customs, characterized by lively, colorful scenes in which rural traditions mingled with the emerging bourgeoisie, picking up on what had been common since the early 19th century. The April Fair in Seville, known as a burst of springtime joy after the austerity of Holy Week, has brought both cultures together since its inception in 1847. For the painters of Sevillan Romanticism, it was therefore an ideal means of depicting not only the pride of the locals, but also the image sought by the travelers who visited the city as tourists. In the foreground, Raphael places the iconic street vendor wearing a fringed scarf and sitting with her back to the viewer. The vendor offers two types of treats, rosquillas, ring-shaped pastries, and buñuelos, rings of fried dough or donuts. Three young people stand in front of the vendor. Two of them cast affectionate glances at each other, while the third turns her head and looks in the other direction. The man is an Andalusian majo, with long sideburns and wears a typical Andalusian hat with turned-up brim. He is wrapped in his cloak. The woman is a striking but typical maja, wearing a pretty ruffled dress with a white shawl around her shoulders. Behind her is the other woman, who is her chaperone, as it was not proper for young single women to be alone in public. The maja seems to be asking the young man to go to another vendor sitting on his table with many barrels to his left. This must be the wine merchant. His tent is decorated with a floppy red and yellow flag. From the back of the tents stands the tall and elegant Giralda, reminiscent of the nationalistic character of Sevillian genre painting. Rafael Benjumea has created a narrative, romantic courtship scene, a popular theme that combines with the festive atmosphere of the fair. Painted in 1850, shortly after Rafael Benjumea's arrival in Madrid, this entertaining painting is a great example of one of the most interesting but least appreciated facets of the Sevillian painter. Raphael's true artistic personality is revealed in folkloric scenes of this kind, depicting Andalusian customs with an obvious popular flavor and appeal, which flooded the art market in the middle decades of the 19th century and established some of the most prominent artists of Andalusian Romanticism. We are taken to a modest tavern. In the middle of the room, a young maja dances to the beat of her castanets and a large tambourine played by another woman. The dancer's costume and her striking headdress indicate that she is probably a traveling artist who performs in different taverns together with the other two women. On the left, an older woman greets some travelers. These men are wearing the typical, conical hat from Granada. Two other men are amused by the dance. One claps to the beat while the other sits at the table and just enjoys the view. On the right, a man sits backwards on his chair, balancing backwards on its legs. He looks down, perhaps at the dancer's feet. Next to him, behind the table, stands the tambourine woman. Over her shoulder a man is trying to get someone's attention, maybe he wants the men at the door. Behind this anxious man is an older woman who has a headscarf. There are 3 people at the table, 2 men and 1 woman. There is a young man without a hat who is watching the dancer intently. Perhaps it is his hat that has been thrown to the dancer and now lies at her feet. He holds a large cutting knife in his hand. Opposite him sits an iconic yet charming majo, holding a drink in his hand as he watches the guitarist in front of him attentively. The woman is also busy with the man. She holds her guitar on the other side. She is beautifully dressed in pink and wears a pale blue embroidered shawl. Incredible details that add to both charm and the national character are scattered throughout the room. 2 pork shoulders hang from the central beam, and on the wall is a dresser with various copper pots, wine bottles, clay jugs, barrels and crockery. 2 sketchy men stand in front of this dresser and talk. On the other side of the room, a door frame indicates the entrance to another room where 2 more men are standing and talking. In the foreground, a white dog has tipped over a pot of stew and is sticking its head in to help itself to a snack. We are drawn into the narrative by the animated spinning dancer, but the descriptive details of each character hold our attention. Each character is fully modeled and very vividly drawn. The vibrancy of the colors and the minuteness of the details, from the women's hair ornaments to the fabric textures and folds of the garments to the individual facial expressions, are exquisitely realized by the artist. Raphael masters the spatial and lighting design of the room. Harsh light falls through a small window at the entrance to the tavern, casting a dramatic shadow on the woman who may be the tavern owner. We know that the bolero dance involves a lot of body turns, but the dancer's head looks a little odd as it is extremely bent over her shoulder. This does not match the care with which he has rendered some of the other figures, such as the woman at the door who has placed her hand so naturally on her hip. This painting could be one of the 3 Andalusian romantic paintings that Rafael Benjumea submitted that year, 1850, for the annual exhibition of the Academy of Fine Arts of San Fernando in Madrid. The intense vitality of the working class in Seville in the mid-19th century served as inspiration for local painters, who produced many genre works depicting the customs and habits of people in the lower social classes. This painting shows an everyday scene at the entrance to a town, where taverns hosted travelers taking a break to rest and regain their strength after a long journey on horseback. They also catered to the farmers and gardeners who worked the large fields around the city. Here we see a narrative scene in front of a thatched wooden hut that serves as a tavern, where food and drink are served. The main figures in this painting are horsemen, travelers, and entertainers. The horseman, with his short suit and sash, on the left, has his elegantly dressed wife sitting sideways on the back of his pretty white horse. He drinks without dismounting while the bartender looks on. In front of the rider, in the shadows, a traveler leaves the tavern. On the right side of the painting, we see that some travelers have stayed to enjoy the entertainment. The pretty bolero dancer is dressed in black and white. She has her fringed shawl draped diagonally from shoulder to waist. Behind her, a boy lifts her hat, and she is not happy about it. She has an angry expression on her face. The other four figures behind the dancer see what is going on, but do nothing about it. The two men in front of the dancer, however, seem to be drunk. One of them claps and dances to the music, while the other man makes a confused face. He slumps down in his chair, an empty wineskin is at his feet. In creating this scene, Raphael Benjumea has skillfully dealt with the contrast of postures and expressions, balancing the static left side with the dynamic right side. Just as the painter has contrasted the attitudes of the two groups that make up the composition, he has also created two clearly delineated areas of light. The left side is in shadow and enhances the sense of peace and tranquility, while the other side is brightly lit, to emphasize the expressive movement of the figures. The colors used by the artist in this painting, although not vibrant, are balanced, especially in the changing tones of the figures' clothing, with a predominance of white and red, amidst muted and even shades. The clear blue of the sky in the background emphasizes the beauty of nature in which the good-natured workers and travelers rest and enjoy recreation. Our next painter from Seville is José Jiménez Aranda. He was a talented draftsman and entered the Royal Academy of Fine Arts of Santa Isabel de Hungría in Seville in 1851. In 1868, he studied in Madrid the works collected in the Prado Museum, especially those of Goya and Velázquez. In 1867, he traveled to Jerez de la Frontera to work as a restorer and stained glass artist. He moved to Rome in 1871, where he stayed for 4 years and met a Catalan artist who was paving the way for another type of romantic painting style, Orientalism. Mariano Fortuny strongly influenced José Jiménez's painterly work. In 1881, he settled in Paris, where he had a studio for 9 years and painted works set in the 18th century, following Fortuny's style with remarkable success. In 1890, he moved to Madrid, where he painted scenes of daily life in a more folkloric style. The death of his wife and daughter in 1892 prompted him to return to his native Seville, where he was appointed a member of the Academy of Fine Arts and taught at the school from 1897. In this painting we see a group of spectators watching the bullfight from their private viewing box in the bullring in Seville. We can see from the gestures of the figures that a dramatic moment is unfolding in the bullring on the left. Outside our field of vision, an accident has occurred that must be very tragic. A horse without a rider, a picador, is running wild, while another white horse, gored by the bull, lies dying on the ground to the right of the arena. The crowd in the stands are beside themselves with excitement. They are a complex mass of bodies that nevertheless somehow retain their shapes. We are close to the figures in the box, and can see their facial expressions and gestures. All the men are very curious about what is happening. One man has jumped up and knocked over his chair. Another is standing on his chair holding onto a pillar to get a better view. Another, in the right-hand corner, has a small pair of binoculars in his hand and is about to climb onto his own chair to see better. All the women, except one, have turned their heads away from the accident. The woman in the foreground has turned her body almost completely. She is wearing an extremely exquisite dress with beautiful pale pink ruffles, trimmed with honey-colored borders that match her fringed shawl. The woman on the right gets up to leave, but her husband seems to want to stop her. What a compelling narrative that evokes both interest and horror in the viewer. The fact that we see the character's reaction to the critical moment that we cannot witness makes us feel excluded from the action without any resolution to the narrative. The spectator box happens to be opposite the Seville Cathedral and its Giralda Tower, which is plausible at this point in history, as the spectator box on the other side was not completed until 1880. The painting was entered in the National Fine Arts Exhibition of 1871, where it won third prize. It later turned out that the painting was not eligible for the medal awarded, and so it was sold in Seville for an epic price. In this painting of a group of women working on their laundry, we see a return of realism. The folksy characters of the washerwomen still conform to the romantic trend of reporting on the lives of ordinary hardworking citizens, but the narrative now demands more insight into the psychology of the characters and the irony of the situation. These new aspects were the influence of his time spent with the Catalan painter Mariano Fortuny. Here we see that the subjects are treated with an academic eye. The hard outer lines and harsh colors have disappeared and been replaced by perfect transitions, softer tones, and greater attention to textual details. Two washerwomen are engaged in an argument in an old courtyard, while another woman seems to be trying to restrain the most aggressive of them. The other women, and a man who is half hidden by the wall, look on. A dog and a child play together on the ground. Clothes, black pots, plates and jugs litter the scene in the courtyard. The irony here is the contrast between the women's activity, which implies cleanliness, and the mess in the courtyard. The artist also contrasts their lower class status with a theatrical attitude, to great effect. Again, José Jiménez Aranda takes us on a questioning journey, forcing us to reflect on the story as we enjoy his painting techniques, lighting, charming figures, and attention to detail. It is such a wonderful painting. This scene takes place in a street, in front of a barber shop. It is recognizable by a copper barber's bowl hanging over the door frame. Inside, we can just make out a raised barber's chair. A young gypsy leans back in his chair and tunes his guitar. On the other side of the entrance, a group sits around a table. In this group we see two men in frock coats, which were the formal knee-length men's coats of the time. A third man pulls up a chair. He is wearing a hairnet, which indicates that he must be the barber. Another older man is playing chess. He is dressed like a typical Catalan priest of the 18th and 19th centuries, recognizable by his oversized tija hat. These hats had a very wide brim and a hemispherical crown, worn by the Catholic clergy, but the angle of this hat makes it look like the priest is wearing a board on his head. José Jiménez Aranda provides a wealth of vivid detail. Chained to the wall above the guitarist's head are two small owls on perches. A white, curly dog, reminiscent of the Spanish water dog breed, lies lazily on its side on the floor. The door frame has ornate neoclassical moldings. There are 10 bird cages of various sizes and shapes on the white wall above the men. Each contains a variety of songbirds. Apart from the wealth of detail that draws our eye across the canvas, we now admire the artist's treatment of the figures. The priest's face is painted with such fine academic realism that he looks like a photograph. The satin and silk fabrics of the younger men's garments are treated with such refinement. The irony of this painting is subtle, as it contrasts the music played by the guitars on one side, with the singing of the birds on the other. If you have ever owned a songbird like a canary, you know that they are noisy birds. In this case, as we see many birds, the humorous twist would be that the guitarist is drowned out. In this work of art, José Luis Jiménez draws on a universal symbol from the lexicon of religious art. However, his Christ on the Cross, entitled Consummatum Est, differs from all other paintings of the same theme. This painting title comes from Latin and means, "Everything is over," which were his last words, according to the Latin Vulgate translation of the Bible, Gospel of John, 19:30. The basic composition of this painting is almost the same as that of Diego Velázquez's 1632 painting, The Crucifixion of Jesus. We see the same iconography, such as the use of 4 nails, and the feet of Christ, resting side by side on a small wooden shelf. This is a classic contrapposto posture. The head shows a narrow halo, as if light were emanating from the figure, and the face rests on the chest. Christ's long hair covers a large part of his face. His body and knees are bruised. Blood flows from the nails driven into his hands and feet, a dramatic feature characteristic of Baroque paintings. The sign above his head confirms his identity, Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews, written in 3 languages, Hebrew, Latin and Greek. Unlike other paintings of Christ on the cross, his vanity cloth, which covers his private parts, has been replaced by diagonal wisps of mist. Jimenez removes any hint of a landscape and envelopes Christ in an atmospheric gas. He may have been influenced by the artists who were more interested in universal symbols that allowed the expression of hidden intuitions and mental processes in a way that would not be possible in a realistic format. These artists, like the Romantics, wanted to use their imaginations to create art. They were called symbolists. Their movement, dating from the second half of the 19th century, was a rebellion against the artists of realism, who were guided by empirical knowledge gained through experimentation and observation, which had come about through the Industrial Revolution and modern sciences. The symbolist painters believed that art should reflect a feeling or an idea. Since their aim was to elevate the values of spirit over matter, artificial elements were used, such as the atmospheric fog, that we see here in this highly unique painting by José Luis Jiménez. During his stay in Paris, José Jiménez Aranda often created small-format works with meticulous execution. This easel painting of 1889 is only 42 by 66 centimeters, or 1 foot 4.5 inches by 2 feet 2 inches. These small paintings were easy to sell. Just as the Romantic artists of Spain looked to their history for inspiration, so did the French Romantics. One of their golden ages was the 18th century, when the painter Antoine Watteau created a unique narrative style of painting called Rococo. Rococo was popular with the French because it showed the happy, carefree, elegant, cultured and sensual life of the privileged class. However, this era and its wealthy people were crushed by the French Revolution. Jiménez Aranda recreates one of these gallant parties in his Romantic imagination. He shows us a group of aristocrats in a rural setting, or an elegant garden, amusing themselves with a game of blind chicken or blind man's bluff. This game, whose tradition goes back to antiquity, was erotically charged in the 18th century and very fashionable among the aristocracy. A blindfolded player has to catch one of the participants and guess who it is. The others have to try not to get caught. The painter Francisco de Goya immortalized this game in some of his paintings. In this scene, the atmosphere is not real, but overly idealized, poetic, with a certain artificial theatrical touch. José Jiménez creates a magical and serene universe of perfect beauty and happiness. On the left we see a charming young man looking into the eyes of a beautiful young lady, who returns his smile. She is holding the hands of 2 other beautiful young girls. The connection between these girls emphasizes the symbolism of the 3 graces. The poet Hesiod describes these 3 goddesses as Aglaia, who stands for radiance, Euphrosyne, who stands for joy, and Thalia, who stands for flourishing. Together they form an ideal of beauty and grace. 2 other girls have hidden behind a tree trunk, so that the man with the blindfold does not touch them, which would take them out of the game. Behind these girls is another man leaning against a tree, but it is impossible to tell what is wrong with him. He seems to be talking to someone, who escapes our gaze. These narrative paintings provided hours of pleasure through questioning conversations. The blind man seems a little off balance and turns his body towards another young lady who holds out her hand to him, while holding up her skirt, so she does not trip. As is typical of these Romantic genre paintings, there is also meaning in this madness. In this case, while life is a party, especially if you are rich, the irony is that the game must end. What a treat this little painting is for the eyes and for the senses. José Jiménez offers us a wealth of detail and decoration, from the flowers on the dresses, to the shapes and gestures of the characters, which are wonderful. The landscape background occupies a prominent position in this painting. It is treated with great detail and descriptive attention, with its differentiated plant species and typologies. Here one wonders if José Jiménez Aranda has adopted the French Impressionists' habit of painting outdoors, plein air. In this painting we see a man who is in the process of selling newspapers. José Jiménez Aranda has returned to the roots of Romanticism by depicting this majo in a Goyesque costume, a style of dress made famous at the end of the 18th century to justify Spanish authenticity against fashions from France. He is dressed in a white shirt. He wears a faded red waist sash, a blue, short and fitted masculine jacket with buttons decorated with black appliques, and matching blue, tight-fitting breeches. The black shoes are decorated with buckles and topped with white stockings. He also wears a hairnet on his head. In the 19th century, newspaper distribution in Spain was consolidated through stalls and kiosks, reflecting the new status that the press had in society at that time. Between 1868 and 1875, during the reign of Amadeo de Saboya and the First Republic, nearly 600 newspapers appeared in Spain. This explosion of information takes place because the revolutionary process begins with freedom of the press, enshrined in the Constitution of 1869. The printing law passed in 1883 by the liberal government of Praxedes Mateo Sagasta also favors periodical publications. All this, together with the refinement of technical means, makes periodicals popular. Although the majority of the population was illiterate, and print runs were kept very small, never exceeding 15,000 copies, the tradition of reading aloud at social gatherings ensured widespread circulation, and newspapers were also displayed in cafes for sharing. According to statistics from 1887, there were 1,128 newspapers in that year. Newspaper sellers were basically street vendors. They had to buy their own newspapers to sell directly to their customers. With the profit, they bought the necessities, but mainly the copies they needed for the next day's sale. The vendors were heard daily, out in the streets shouting the newspaper's headline, or the latest news, to attract the readers. The last artist in this course is José García Ramos from Seville. He attended the Seville School of Fine Arts at a young age and was trained in the workshop of José Jiménez Aranda, with whom he traveled to Rome in 1872. In this city, he earned his living with small-format paintings of landscapes and Andalusian costumes, as he himself had a great fondness for this genre. With this kind of work he was able to earn a living. In Rome, he met Mariano Fortuny, who strongly influenced his later work. In 1877, he visited Naples and Venice, and in 1882 he returned to Spain after a stay in Paris. In Seville, he was appointed professor at the School of Industrial Art, and academician at the School of Santa Isabel. He brought the Andalusian folk genre to its highest level of quality and became the most important painter of his time in Seville, a position he gladly shared with his admired José Jiménez Aranda. When he was appointed lecturer at the Royal Fine Arts of Santa Isabel de Hungría in Seville in 1893, his popularity attracted even more attention. José García Ramos opted for a mixture of academic realism to create narratives with the costumes of his time. He chose the everyday and real costumes that were still common and natural in certain urban enclaves, and not the stereotypical, romantic images that Sevillian artists, in the past, had created for foreign travelers. Let's take a look at his most famous paintings. This painting, entitled Spanish Courtship, is one of the most popular genre paintings of Andalusian Romanticism by José García Ramos. According to historical documents, he painted this work during a short stay in Granada in 1883. This painting alludes to the demure practices of couples during their courtship rituals in Andalusia in centuries past. Long walks and endless conversations called pelando la pava, or peeling the turkey, were undertaken by the lovers, almost always under the strict watch of chaperones or family. Here Ramos shows us a lovelorn couple trying to have a romantic conversation through the bars of a window. The rider from the countryside can only reach this window from the saddle of his horse. The horseman is wearing his best short suit and sash, and his horse is richly adorned. He listens attentively to his beloved while leaning on the iron bars. The couple is accompanied by a group of cheerful women who look at them with a mocking smile. One of them removes her parasol to get a better look at the couple and covers her eyes with her fan. Another decorates her hair with flowers, and a third begins to sing while beating her tambourine. In the background, Granada's famous Albayacin neighborhood rises into the breezy sky. This painting shows Ramos' special ability to divide his composition with an appealing spatial distribution of elements. He places the different viewpoints on different levels, which gives depth to the street and brings the horse into the foreground. The horse has been carefully rendered with a remarkable foreshortening that creates a perspective effect that deceives the eye. The group of three women is extremely finely and exquisitely resolved. The white robes, together with the light pinks and yellows, create a beautiful and elegant contrast. On the first woman on the left, soft, subtle shades of white move from the parasol to the dress to the fan. A delicate shade stretches across her face as she shields her eyes from the sun with the fan. The flowered scarf on the second woman is painted with impressionistic flair, creating color with skillful splashes of paint. And, if you look closely, you can even make out fine dots on the dress of the third woman playing the tambourine. Finally, the development of the hamlet and the cloudscape show Garcia Ramos' talent for cityscapes, which he painted on numerous occasions, although they are almost always populated by figures. José Garcia Ramos was undoubtedly one of the most successful painters of the Sevillan costumbrismo genre. He devoted almost his entire career to drawing scenes from daily life in Seville, from flamenco festivals to bullfights, which were sold with great ease inside and outside the borders, with enormous expressiveness and meticulous technique. This work is part of his production of small-format paintings that were so widespread in society at the end of the 19th century. Entitled El Baile Balerius, the Dance Balerius, it combines all the characteristic elements of the painterly costumbrismo of the last quarter of the 19th century. The dance refers to the most famous flamenco style, characterized by its joyful rhythmic character and accompanied by palmas, produced by clapping with cupped palms. This narrative scene takes place in a tavern in Seville. It is filled with the typical romantic clichés, with which the city is still identified today. We see a bullfighting poster, barrels of wine, the legendary cattail chairs, and flamenco figures. Garcia Ramos' virtuoso technique of firm and precise drawing, compressed composition, and determined brushstrokes gives this painting its charm. The dancer at the center of the painting has a realistic face rendered with soft skin tones. From the flowers in her hair, to her beautiful flowered black fringed shawl, to her white ruffled skirt, she is full of movement. She is a joyful, expressive vision of dance. The other seated woman, looking at us, and the singing man, are more simply drawn but still filled with expressive charm. In the foreground on the left, a white cloth or napkin has been discarded. There are also pieces of oranges whose peels have been thrown on the ground. This is only a small part of the narrative, but it evokes a sense of panic as one wonders if the dancer might step on the objects and fall down. Here we see a thirsty man bending backwards to finish his drink. He is dressed all in black and is possibly a santero. This word refers to a craftsman who makes images of Christ, but also to a person who runs a hermitage. In any case, he is holding a magnificently dressed statue of the child Jesus in his left arm, and drinking a bowl of wine with his right hand. This man has hurriedly taken off his coat and hat to stop at a tavern that serves drinks through a public window. The title of this painting, Hosta Verdi, Cristo mio, means, until I see you, my Christ, and refers to the fact that when he empties his bowl of wine, he will see an image of Christ on the cross, adorning the bottom. The barman is a gruff-looking figure created by Ramos in an academic realist style. Due to the extreme foreshortening, he stands behind the counter so that his hands can be seen in the frontal plane. Another man looks at him with an amused smile on his face. He is dressed more fashionably, and has a walking stick with a silver tip lying on the chair in front of him. Ramos regales us with details. A very small birdcage hangs high above the bar. On the right, a handmade sign reads, Oi no seh meniana si, which means, no credit today, come back tomorrow. Behind this sign are beautiful wooden shutters with diamond cuts. The glasses and the jug on the table have been painted with great care. The narrative raises the question, why is this man so thirsty? Like many of the other Sevillian painters who once kept the genre of Andalusian Romanticism alive, Ramos had to take leave and broaden his horizons. He struggled with both family and financial problems and had to attract new clients from the cosmopolitan circles, who abandoned the popular subjects in favor of more ostentation and frivolous reflections of the new era, the Belle Epoque. His intention was simply to introduce his works to the international market, in this case the Argentine market, where these types of scenes began to enjoy great success with the wealthiest clients, and became works in constant demand by the main European and American art dealers. This painting is an excellent testimony to the artist's new aspirations, especially to the technical sophistication of his execution. It is one of his best works from this new era. It is characterized by a particularly rigorous and careful drawing, elegant colors, light and at the same time soft tones. He succeeds in balancing the composition, especially considering the large number of figures, a challenge that the artist skillfully managed to solve. Masked balls were one of the favorite subjects of Spanish painters in the last quarter of the 19th century. Many artists devoted themselves above all to the scenes of high society, seeing in this genre the opportunity to create decorative works with easily accessible subjects. These were works that reflected the high points of social life at the turn of the century. These kinds of sophisticated gatherings, characterized by the thrilling experience of anonymity, provided the ideal setting for social display, and especially for infatuation or gallant courtship, but also for successive misunderstandings. All these were themes that were equally and frequently treated in the literature of the time. The scene is arranged almost like a frieze in the foreground, and shows the moment when the crowd leaves a masquerade ball, typical of costume contests, as a poster at the entrance clearly proclaims, Masquerade Ball. Costume Contest. The groups of ball participants hurry out through the monumental doors of the building. In the middle, a costumed woman seems to have fainted, perhaps because she has drunk too much alcohol, and is supported around the waist by a person behind her. Meanwhile, on the far left, a gentleman descends the stairs and grasps the wrist of an elegant lady, perhaps his wife, who seems to be looking in the direction of the viewer. Meanwhile, his other hand reaches back to grasp the hand of another young, masked woman, who looks after him. Could this be the end of their flirtation at the ball? The artist does not forget to add a touch of social contrast when depicting these elegant figures, a great example of his powers of observation and knowledge of the humble classes that were among his favorite subjects. Thus, outside the doors of the theater, painted with sharp realism and unique immediacy, we can observe a lower-class coachman, wrapped in a woolen coat, waiting patiently with a cigarette in his mouth. Dear viewers, I want to extend my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to watch this educational lesson on video. Your support for SpainLifestyle.com is greatly appreciated, and it means so much to me. Through your engagement with this video, you have shown a passion for learning and a desire to expand your knowledge on Spain's unique and wonderful culture. I am honored to be a part of that journey for you. As I work hard to continue to bring you the best educational content, I encourage you to visit my website spainlifestyle.com for more lessons, books, and informative articles. Spainlifestyle.com also has a Facebook page and a YouTube channel. They are also fantastic ways to stay up to date with MP's latest content and connect with like-minded individuals. Once again, thank you for your support and for being a part of my art lovers community. I hope you will enjoy all that SpainLifestyle.com has to offer.